5 experienced divers slip beneath the surface off Vaavu Atoll in the Maldives. The dive is planned to last 1 hour. Waiting above them is a boat carrying a scientific expedition from Genoa. An hour goes by, then another. Nobody comes back up. What made a group of marine biologists, people who knew the sea as a profession, swim into the underwater cave of Dhekunu Kandu, 60 meters down, twice the recreational limit, without the right gas and without a line to lead them back out of the dark? And why would a Maldivian soldier, who had never even met them, end up paying for their recovery with his own life? The 14th of May, 2026, would become the darkest date in the history of Maldivian diving. Every year, the University of Genoa sends a research trip into the Indian Ocean. The tradition goes back to 1997. Biologists head for warm water to study coral reefs, coastal habitats, the life of the tropical shallows. In May of 2026, 20 Italians gather aboard the live-aboard MV Duke of York's, a vessel built for days of back-to-back diving. The trip is organized by the operator Albatross Top Boat. Among the passengers are scientists, their students, and family members. For these people, the sea isn't a holiday. It's their work, and it's the point of their lives. The boat sits off Vaavu Atoll, about 100 kilometers south of the capital, Malé. All around is the postcard the whole world flies here for: turquoise water, white sand, reefs packed with fish. For this group, it's something else entirely. This is their laboratory. By day, they go under with their equipment. In the evening, they process the data, argue about coral species and the state of the reefs. At the center of the team is Monica Montefalcone, 51 years old, an associate professor of ecology. Beside her is her daughter, Georgia Somakal. Mother and daughter, same expedition, same water. For Monica, this is normal. Her daughter often traveled with her. Also on the team are Muriel Adanino, a marine biologist and researcher, and Federico Gualtieri, who held a master's degree in marine biology and had worked as an instructor. The diving on board is run by Gianluca Benedetti, captain and dive instructor, the man responsible for the safety of every descent. These are not people who picked up a certificate over a week of vacation. Behind them are hundreds of hours underwater, a working knowledge of dive physiology, the ability to read a reef and a current, which is exactly what makes what happened so hard to understand. Their experience didn't save them. That day, the dive is just expedition routine. Nobody on board is expecting trouble. The boat gets ready for another descent, the same as dozens before it. And down below, not far from the island of Alimathea, something is waiting for them. Something that looks completely harmless right up until the second it becomes a trap. Monica Montefalcone climbed the whole ladder from student to respected scientist without skipping a rung. She graduated from the University of Milan with honors in biology, then tied her career to Genoa, to the Department of Earth, Environmental and Life Sciences, known by its acronym DISTAV. That's where she became an associate professor of ecology. Her specialty was coastal ecosystems. In the Mediterranean, she spent years studying Posidonia, the underwater seagrass meadows that act as the lungs of the whole basin. From 2013 on, she led major research projects on coral reefs. The Maldives became her permanent field. She came back again and again to track how the reefs were changing under the pressure of warming water. For her, diving was a tool, not a thrill ride. Going under meant collecting data you simply can't get from the surface. The people around her were cut from the same cloth. Muriel Adanino held a PADI Dive Master certification and nitrox training, a breathing mix with a higher share of oxygen, a water professional, not a beginner. Federico Gualtieri, the young marine biology graduate, had also worked as an instructor. Gianluca Benedetti knew these local waters like the back of his hand. On Monica's daughter, Georgia Somakal, the accounts are contradictory. Some sources call her a student, others say only that she regularly accompanied her mother. Either way, she was no stranger underwater. The conclusion is simple. This was a genuinely qualified team, not a pack of reckless amateurs. And yet this team made a chain of decisions, each of which looked acceptable on its own, and together they added up to a disaster. Being qualified in marine biology is not the same as being ready for a technical dive into a cave. Knowing a reef doesn't save you in the darkness under a rock. Now, the map. Vaavu Atoll is a ring of coral islands around a calm lagoon. It's a well-known spot among divers. Clear water, rich life, rays and sharks on almost every descent. Thousands of tourists dive here every season, and the overwhelming majority of those dives end without a single incident. Off the island of Alimathea runs the Dunu Condu channel, a tidal passage between the open ocean and the lagoon. Divers love channels like this. Tidal currents bring plankton, and the big fish follow. You enter the water, drop down along the reef wall, watch the life at moderate depth, come back. Classic recreational diving. In the Maldives, it's tightly regulated. The law allows recreational divers to go no deeper than 30 meters. Past that line, an ordinary dive stops being ordinary. Some of the group had extended permits. 3 of them, Montefalcone, Audinino, and Gualtieri, had been cleared by local authorities down to 50 meters, deeper than the standard, but still within limits that are understood and controlled. And here's the key detail. Not one of those permits allowed them to go inside an underwater cave. Swimming along a wall at 50 meters and entering an enclosed space under the rock are 2 different worlds with 2 different sets of survival rules. Strong currents, the kind that can drag a diver away, are not normally a feature of this channel. The place looked predictable and familiar, and that was its reputation. That was exactly the catch. When a site feels safe, vigilance goes soft. People who had been diving waters like this for years might not have felt the line where a familiar channel turns into something else entirely. The real danger here wasn't in the water or the current. It was waiting under the rock in a dark opening where a recreational diver has no business going. That opening is called Dhekunu Kandu. Different sources give it different names, Dunu or Dunu Condu, but they all mean the same place, an underwater cave hidden in the wall of the channel. From the outside, just a dark hole. Inside, a system where an unprepared person has almost no chance. The entrance to the first chamber sits at 55 to 58 meters. That figure alone is already outside recreational diving. The first chamber connects to a second through a narrow tunnel, roughly 3 meters wide. The second chamber is bigger, and it has no light at all. Not a glimmer from above, not a hint of an exit. Just blackness, cut only by the beam of a flashlight. The floor is covered in silt. The whole system runs 60 to 70 meters. Cave diving works on a fundamentally different logic. On a normal dive, there's always open water above you. Something goes wrong, you go up, toward the surface, toward air. In a cave, there is no up. Above your head is stone. The only way out is the way you came in, and you have to find it yourself. That's why cave diving is its own discipline, with its own unforgiving rules. 2 of those rules matter here. The first one is silt. One careless kick of a fin over a silted floor, and a cloud lifts, turning clear water into an impenetrable haze in a second. They call it a silt out. Visibility drops to 0, and your light becomes useless. The second rule is the guideline. A thin cord the diver reels out from the entrance. It leads back, like Ariadne's thread in the labyrinth. Where your eyes can't be trusted, that cord is the only guarantee of finding the way out. Dhekunu Kandu wasn't some evil trap set deliberately. A cave is simply a cave, predictable to anyone who knows its laws, and merciless to anyone who walks in without the training and the gear. Between those 2 outcomes, there are only minutes. All 5 bodies were found at depths reaching 60 meters, deeper than the law allowed, and deeper than common sense allowed. At that depth, physics starts working against the human body. Take the air a diver breathes. Ordinary compressed air at 60 meters brings on nitrogen narcosis. Under pressure, nitrogen hits the brain like alcohol. It slows your thinking, dulls your reactions, and produces either false confidence or panic. A diver may have no idea he's already making mistakes. On the surface, anyone would notice that state. Underwater, in the dark, it kills. The gas is also the biggest open question in this story. The accounts are contradictory. Some sources say the group was on ordinary compressed air. Others say the tanks were filled with nitrox 28, a mix with a raised oxygen content. Nitrox is safer than air at moderate depths, but it has a hard ceiling. At 60 meters, the oxygen fraction in that mix becomes toxic. It brings a risk of oxygen toxicity and a sudden loss of control underwater. Both versions lead to the same conclusion. The mix this group was carrying was wrong for the depth they went to. The next factor is decompression. The deeper and longer the dive, the more nitrogen dissolves into your tissues. To surface safely, you have to come up slowly, with stops, letting the gas work its way out. By expert estimates, a safe ascent from 60 meters would have required roughly 6 hours of decompression. 6 hours. They didn't have anywhere near that much breathing gas. One of the rescuers who brought the bodies up put it bluntly. At that depth, those tanks would last about 10 minutes. All of this is basic technical diving. The discipline demands special mixes like trimix, oxygen, nitrogen, and helium, redundant equipment, and separate training. The group had none of it. They entered the cave with a recreational diver's kit, into a place where recreational diving ends. On the 14th of May, 2026, at around 11 in the morning, 5 people go into the water. It's an ordinary day, the sea is calm, the boat is in position. The plan calls for about an hour underwater, a standard duration for a dive like this. Nothing about these preparations looks like a goodbye. The gear, though, is troubling. 2 of them are in swimsuits with neoprene jackets over the top, a light setup for warm surface water. 2 others are in thin, full-length wetsuits. On the 5th diver's gear, there is no information at all. Neither option is built for 60 meters, where the water is colder and where the chill drains your strength and your clarity far faster than it does in the shallows. These people were dressed for a familiar tropical dive, not for a technical penetration into cold darkness. And one more detail, the one that later turns out to be decisive. No guideline is laid. That cord, the one that's supposed to lead you back out, is never reeled out on the way into the cave. Maybe because they never planned on going far inside. Maybe because the group was used to open water, where your reference point is the light above you. Whatever the reason, they had no thread back to the exit. 5 divers go into the water and start down along the wall of the Dhekunu Channel, toward the dark opening. The boat stays behind and waits. Life on deck goes on as usual. The 15 remaining members of the expedition busy themselves with their own tasks and glance at the clock, expecting their colleagues back any minute. From the surface, you can't see what's happening down there. You can't hear it, you can't step in. All you can do is wait. They drop to the entrance of the first chamber. From here on, their fate depends only on themselves and on what they find inside. The first chamber is not yet the point of no return. The real line is further in. Nobody saw what happened inside. The events can only be reconstructed from what investigators found, from the position of the bodies, and from the preliminary assessment by DAN Europe, the European Diving Safety Organization. The reconstruction is restrained, with no guesswork, but its logic is merciless. The 5 pass out of the first chamber, through the narrow 3-meter tunnel, and into the second, the one with no light at all. The last natural reference point disappears. In the first chamber, you could still guess which way you came from. In the second, there's nothing but the cones of light from the flashlights and the blackness around them. Silt on the floor. And here, most likely, the trap springs. The one every cave diving instructor warns about. A few careless kicks over that silted floor, and it plays out exactly the way the textbook says, silt out. And the beams run straight into a wall of suspended sediment. At that moment, the missing guideline stops being a mistake and becomes a death sentence. With no cord back to the exit, in total darkness, there is no way to tell an entrance from a dead end. Every direction feels the same. By expert assessment, the group became disoriented and never found the way back. Exactly where the darkness led them wouldn't be known for another week until people who actually know how to go into a place like that went in. Then physiology piles on top. Nitrogen narcosis at that depth slows your thinking at precisely the moment you need absolute clarity. Stress in a situation like this speeds up your breathing, and the faster you breathe, the faster the tanks empty. Tanks that at this depth hold only a few minutes to begin with. And that closes a vicious circle every instructor knows well. The more frightened the diver, the less time he has left. Nobody ever makes it back to the exit. The hour allotted for the dive runs out down there in the darkness of the second chamber. Now back to the surface, to the people still waiting on the boat. By noon, the hour is almost up, and there's nothing on the water, no bubbles, no heads breaking through. The crew of the MV Duke of York starts to worry and begins searching. More time passes. By 1:30, it's clear. The 5 are not coming back, and they can't be found with what's on board. The boat alerts the Maldivian authorities, and here another circumstance is added to the tragedy. There's a storm warning in the area, the weather is turning, which complicates any rescue work on the surface and below it. But the bigger problem is something else. Later, Maldivian officials would say they had no idea a cave dive was planned. According to the authorities, the group had declared an ordinary dive, not a penetration into an underwater cave at extreme depth. That admission raises an agonizing question. Had the authorities known these people were going into a cave, they could have brought in the Coast Guard and trained specialists ahead of time, arranged backup, talked them out of it, or supervised them. But according to the authorities, no application for a dive like that was ever filed. The rescuers only learned what kind of descent this was when it was already far too late to rescue anyone. The argument over responsibility flared up immediately, and it's still going. The University of Genoa called the dive an unauthorized personal activity by the participants. The university's position is that this descent was not part of the scientific program. Lawyers have challenged that reading. The expeditions run every year, the dives are an inseparable part of them, and drawing a clean line between scientific work and personal initiative here is anything but simple. While the argument heats up above and the storm rolls in, 5 people are lying below. And the operation that begins now will turn out to be so dangerous that it takes another life. On the 16th of May, 2 days after the group disappears, Maldivian military divers get to work. There's no hope of finding anyone alive. Far too much time has passed underwater. The task is different now. Not a rescue, but recovering bodies from a cave that ordinary divers have no business entering. 8 local divers work in shifts, relieving each other at depth, because every descent to marks like these is strictly time-limited. They locate the entrance to the first chamber and go in. And there, right by the entrance, at around 58 to 60 meters, lies the first body. It's Gianluca Benedetti, the captain of the boat and the dive instructor, the man responsible for the safety of the dives. One detail says more than any words. Benedetti's tank is empty. The air was used up completely. He got closer to the exit than anyone, and still fell short by a handful of meters and a handful of minutes. They found him first because he stayed in the first chamber, the one the military divers could still safely reach. Beyond the narrow tunnel began the second chamber, that darkness. The military divers do not go in. That isn't cowardice, it's cold arithmetic. They have no gear, no gas mixes, and no specialized training for the far end of a cave at that depth. Going in there with recreational equipment would have meant repeating the fate of the very people they were trying to bring up. They do what they can, and they stop at a sensible line. With the first body recovered, the scale of the tragedy becomes fully clear. 4 more are still somewhere inside, in a darkness nobody can reach yet. And the operation to bring out Benedetti has already shown just how lethal this depth is, and it's about to prove it again, in the bitterest way possible. Among the men who brought Benedetti's body up was one in uniform, Sergeant Major Mohammed Mahoudi of the Coast Guard of the Maldives National Defense Force. He was doing his job, helping to recover the body of a foreign diver from the cave. Mahoudi didn't know these Italians, and still he went down after them. On the ascent, he starts feeling ill. The symptoms come on fast. His comrades understand this isn't fatigue. He's evacuated urgently and taken to ADK Hospital in the capital, Male. The diagnosis is decompression sickness. It's the exact danger those long stops on the way up are designed to prevent, come up too quickly, and the nitrogen dissolved in your tissues forms bubbles, and that hits the body hard. At great depth, working at the edge of your limits, the risk of that outcome climbs sharply. The doctors fight for him, but they can't save him. On the 16th of May, Sergeant Major Mohammed Mahoudi dies. He becomes the 6th victim of this story, the only one who died not on a dive for science or for the experience of it, but while trying to bring the dead back up. He's buried the same day, with military honors. The president of the Maldives, Mohammed Muizu, attends the ceremony. Mahoudi's death changes the whole approach to the operation. It becomes obvious that the others cannot be recovered with the same crews and the same methods. Every further descent into that cave threatens another death. The first recovery attempts are suspended. The death of a rescuer draws a hard line. From here, it can only be done differently, with different people, different equipment, a different level of training. The Maldives will have to call in those for whom dives like this are a profession, not an act of heroism at the edge of survival. On the 18th and 19th of May, an international mission comes together. It brings in the Maldivian authorities, the Italian side, and DAN Europe, the Diving Safety and Medicine Organization. There's one objective: recover 4 bodies from the far end of the cave and lose nobody else. For that, they call in a team of Finnish technical divers, Sami Pakarinen, Jenny Westerlund, and Patrick Grönqvist. Not random volunteers. This is a narrow circle of world-class specialists, people for whom penetrating flooded caves at extreme depth is a working profession. Some of them had already faced a tragedy like this one. They took part in recovering bodies from the Pluragrata cave in Norway back in 2014, where divers also died. The cost of a mistake in enclosed water is not something these people learned from a textbook. The Finns' equipment is in a completely different class. Instead of ordinary tanks, they use closed-circuit rebreathers. In an open system, every exhale goes off into the water as bubbles. A rebreather scrubs the carbon dioxide out of the exhaled gas and gives it back to the diver, topping it up with oxygen. The time you can spend at depth multiplies. The very minutes the victims ran out of become hours for the Finns. On top of that, underwater scooters. Cover distance fast. Save your strength and your gas. Only with a setup like that can you reach the far, dark end of the cave and come back alive. Where a recreational diver burns through his entire supply in 10 minutes, a technical diver on a rebreather works methodically, with a reserve. The Finns begin a detailed survey of the second chamber, the one the military divers couldn't enter. They go into the darkness that swallowed 5 people, not with courage stretched to the breaking point, but with precise calculation and the right gear, and they find something nobody expected. In the far part of the second chamber, the Finnish team makes a discovery that explains a great deal. A dead-end tunnel, a passage that appears on none of the cave's maps, a blind branch leading nowhere. Inside it lie 4 bodies. The find clarifies how they died. In the darkness, with the water clouded and no guideline, the group most likely mistook that side passage for the way out. They pushed deeper and deeper into a dead end, believing they were moving towards safety, while in fact, they were moving away from it. That side passage became the final trap. No one planning that dive could possibly have known it was there. The recovery is done in stages, across 2 days. On the 19th of May, the Finns bring up the bodies of Monica Montefalcone and Federico Gualtieri. On the bodies are action cameras that film the dive. Later, those become one of the key pieces of physical evidence for the investigation. The bodies are handed over at around 30 meters to the Maldivian divers, who complete the lift to the surface. The division of labor is deliberate. The technical divers pull the bodies out of the lethal zone, and at safe depth, the locals take the baton. On the 20th of May, the last 2 are recovered, Georgia Somakal and Muriel Audanino. While they work, sharks appear nearby, calm reef sharks, and once, briefly, a tiger shark, which shows no interest and moves on. For the recovery team, it's background noise. They stay focused and get on with the job. Mohammed Hussein Sharif, speaking for the Maldivian side, confirms that all the bodies will be returned home to Italy. The operation, begun by local military divers and paid for with Sergeant Mahoudi's life, is completed by an international team. All 6 are brought up. What remains is to work out what exactly killed those 5 down there, and only the doctors and the investigators on land can answer that. From the dark water off Vaavu Atoll, the bodies pass into a world of paperwork, forensic reports, and medical findings. Benedetti's body, recovered first, right at the cave entrance, was flown home ahead of the others. On the 23rd of May, 4 coffins arrive at Malpensa Airport in Milan. Monica Montefalcone, her daughter Georgia, Muriel Audanino, and Federico Gualtieri. Their homeland welcomes its scientists back in a very different way than it saw them off. The bodies are sent for autopsy to the Sant'Antonio Abate Hospital in the town of Gallarate. On the 26th of May, the autopsies are complete. In part, the result is what everyone expected. In part, it raises new questions. There are no mechanical injuries on the bodies. Nothing points to any external force underwater. The Montefalcone family's lawyer, Giuseppe Pugliese, states it plainly. No trauma or damage was found, which means the cause of death lies not in physical injury, but in something that leaves no marks on the body. And establishing that is a job for toxicology, for analysis of blood and tissue. This is where the story runs up against the limit of what is actually known. The main working theory is asphyxia and drowning after the breathing gas ran out. At that depth, what was in those tanks would last only minutes, and the group never found its way out of a sealed, dark cave. The theory fits with Benedetti's empty tank, and with the calculations for the depth. But other versions are also on the table, and the data here is contradictory. If the tanks held not air but nitrox with a raised oxygen content, then at 60 meters oxygen toxicity could have struck, with a sudden loss of consciousness underwater. Separately, experts point to panic. It sharply accelerates air consumption. Only the final toxicology will be able to pull these versions into a single picture. It's important not to mistake a guess for a fact. As of the completion of the autopsies, there is no definitive conclusion on the cause of death. There is what's established, the absence of injuries. And there are theories, waiting to be confirmed. The story is more honest told exactly this way, without the temptation to hand over a simple final answer where none exists yet. While the doctors work out how these people died, investigators are chasing a different question: how this was ever allowed to happen in the first place. An investigation is opened into manslaughter. The case runs across 2 jurisdictions. The main work is done by the Maldives, where the tragedy took place, while a parallel proceeding is opened by the prosecutor's office in Rome, because the victims were Italian citizens. Investigators seize everything that might hold a picture of what happened. Computers, action cameras, including a GoPro, dive computers with their records of depth and time, the expedition's paperwork. The dive computers matter most of all. They log the dive profile second by second, how deep they went, how long they stayed, when the trouble started. The electronic data is carried back to Italy by a colleague from the same expedition, to be handed over to the investigators. A separate thread of the investigation is the boat itself. The license of the MV Duke of York is suspended. According to investigators, the vessel had no permit to operate as a dive school, that is, to organize exactly this kind of diving. That shifts the question out of the realm of tragic accident and into the realm of responsibility. Who was supposed to check the qualifications? Who was supposed to stop people with unsuitable gear from going into a cave at 60 meters? Among the causes named by the investigation, the main ones are the absence of the right equipment and the right training for a dive like this. Not malice, not mechanical failure, a mismatch between where these people went and what they took with them. The positions of the university and the investigation never converged, and there is still no final conclusion on where the blame lies. What is clear is something else: a chain of allowances, a permit that got stretched, gear that didn't match, a declaration that was never filed, came together into a tragedy in which not a single safeguard held. This story has taken its place in the statistics. The deadliest diving accident in the history of the Maldives, 6 dead. Never before had an underwater accident here taken so many lives. But behind the number are not abstract casualties. They're specific people with names, professions, and families. The authorities responded quickly. The Maldives began drafting a law imposing strict limits on technical and wreck diving, on everything that goes beyond the recreational limit of 30 meters, cave penetrations, descents to sunken ships, work at great depth. Under the plan, permits for such dives would go only to researchers and highly qualified divers, with minimum requirements for experience, training, and equipment. The tragedy exposed a gap in the rules that an entire group slipped through, and the state moved to close it. The rescuers deserve a word of their own. The president of Italy, Sergio Mattarella, awarded the 3 Finnish divers, Pakarinen, Westerlund, and Grönqvist, the Order of Merit of the Italian Republic. Men and women who went into someone else's darkness to bring the dead home received the highest recognition of the country whose citizens they recovered, and at the center of it all, 6 people remain. Scientists who devoted their lives to studying the sea, who came back to these reefs year after year to understand how to protect them, died in the water they loved and knew. A mother and a daughter, Monica and Georgia, went together on the same dive. And Sergeant Mahudi gave his life recovering the bodies of people he had never met. The exact cause of death of the 5 is still waiting on the final toxicology, and it's more honest to stop here than to fill in the blanks. What we do know is the chain of decisions: depth beyond the limit, unsuitable equipment, no guideline, gas that was wrong for that depth. We know that each of those steps, taken on its own, looked acceptable, and we know what they added up to. A hard lesson in how, in enclosed dark water, the price of a single underestimated decision is measured in human lives.